At 23 years old, I guess I'm technically an adult. I certainly don't feel like one right now. In fact, all I can think about is calling my conservative parents back in the Midwest and pleading with them for help. What I wouldn't give to just run away all the way back home. I could just imagine myself snuggling up in my childhood bed and pulling the cartoon-styled bed sheets over my head just to let all my adult problems fade away. Damn it, I can't though. I need to be braver than this. My worried girlfriend needs me to be braver than this. We're both in it together, I suppose. If only I could somehow hide just how terrified I am in front of her, that would probably make Gwen feel better, safer. But no, every innocuous little bump in the night or intrusive ding from either of our phones leaves me visibly flinching each and every freaking time. I just don't know what to do. Maybe I should start at the beginning. I'll tell you what I know, and maybe it will make sense to you. It's possible that I'm overthinking all of this. Truth be told, this all started about 1 year ago today. It was the second week of November, and the rent on my expensive city apartment was already late. The reason? My horrible, self-absorbed, immature, and all-around slimy roommate Clint, taking him on as a roommate, was the worst decision I had ever made. Always a super spreader of destruction and inconvenience. If only I had kicked him out when I had the chance. Anyway, it was the second week of November, like I was saying, and one Friday evening in walks Clint. Clint always knew how to make a loud entrance, and that time was no exception. He immediately hollered and said that I got our rent covered. Bruh, I was skeptical, knowing his penchant for exaggeration, but I looked up from my phone and noticed how utterly bizarre he looked. In his hand he was holding a paycheck. The other arm was fixed to his side in a fresh cast. Obviously, his arm was broken. He was also decked out in some kind of sci-fi or cosplay type outfit. Completely bizarre, even for him. What the hell happened to you? I asked. I got our rent, dude. Also, I got a lead on a way to make some big bucks, he exclaimed, somehow oblivious at how skeptically I was looking at him. What happened to your arm? Oh, it'll heal in no time. I was downtown. There was a protest for higher pay for educators or something. I was there and it got a little rowdy. But anyway, I got paid. Paid for what? I asked. I don't know. Some recruiting company just told me to show up looking like a goofball and try and draw a bunch of attention to myself during the protest. Then they cut me a check. So cool. I still didn't get what Clint was going on about. I tried to ask for more information, but all he seemed like he wanted to talk about was this new idea that he had. Anyway, I saw Gwen downtown. When I was there, just bumped into her on the street. Did she talk with you about this already? No, I doubted any interaction between Clint and Gwen was purely by chance. He probably happened to drop by the clothing store where she worked. Yeah, so it was right outside of her work. She was talking about how all these rich people come in and buy these ridiculous purses and bags. And I was like, why are these so expensive? Do you know what she said? I was still processing the fact he saw Gwen today and didn't answer. At least I didn't think so. It's because they control the supply. It's simple supply and demand. Bruh, they keep the inventory super low and they are good enough quality that everybody is scrambling to get one, he said enthusiastically. So what? Well, according to Gwen, the brand that makes the purses has their headquarters and distribution centers right outside of the city. The supply is artificially low at the stores. We can just sneak over there before the end of the year, before they destroy their overstocked quantity for the year, and grab some. No one would know, and we could sell them secondhand for thousands. I'm talking like 20,000 per purse. I was already calling Gwen after he finished talking. She was supposed to get off soon, and I couldn't wait to talk to her about this strange interaction they had today. Gwen hated Clint, and I couldn't see how they would have this type of conversation. When I finally got a hold of her, she confirmed what Clint had told me. Apparently, they had talked vaguely about this, and she was going to talk to me. Nothing illegal, but if they are going to incinerate them anyway, maybe we can grab a few. It'll be a few years before we can actually afford one ourselves, she added. Besides, maybe we can get several and resell them. Who knows? I remember thinking at the time that this was it. I was going to kick Clint out and finally move in with Gwen. Money would be tight for the next year, but I knew it would be fine. I just had to talk her out of this strange scheme that Clint had cooked up and we could start the next chapter in our life. Well, it turned out that Gwen was pretty adamant on this crazy plan with Clint. I don't know whether it was the allure of this mythical designer bag, the fact she fell for Clint's false charm, or some other side of her that I was unfamiliar with, but eventually, they talked me into it. Begrudgingly, I was now an accomplice in their delusional scheme to save a few designer bags from a premature death. It was 1 week later, when all 3 of us hopped in my scratched-up blue sedan, and we started the journey out of the city. It took about an hour to make it to the facility, or at least what we thought at the time was the facility. This was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a thick forest and awful roads. The fact it was night, and road lights were spared made for a scary drive. I don't know how people that worked there made the commute safely. Anyway, the facility looked brand new. We parked about half a mile away and made our way to what looked like their warehouse building. It had some docking areas and trucks parked out front. It's a bit eerie to see such a modern marvel in the middle of wild nature, but there it was. Clint was laughing and chatting with Gwen, who seemed really excited with this whole adventure. I guess I was even feeling a bit excited too as we made our way up to the building and started to joke around with them. "Do you think they have a men's section?" I joked. At this point, we figured the whole place was closed, which was odd because it was technically Black Friday. I would assume they would have some sort of nighttime activity in a place like this, but the place seemed closed. It was actually dead quiet until a scream pierced the night. Well, not a scream exactly, like a loud squeaking. I couldn't quite place it. "What do you think that is?" Gwen asked Clint as I trailed along. She seemed spooked. "I don't know, it should be around here," Clint said, making no attempt to be quiet and rounding around the back side of the warehouse. "No way," Gwen gasped. The sight that greeted us was so bizarre that I immediately knew we must be in the wrong place. There, tied to a stake in the ground, was a shaking lamb. It seemed to be crying out in the night and looking for something. "Maybe its mother." "Who would do that?" Gwen asked. She started to walk towards it before I grabbed her arm. The lamb was tied to a stake in what appeared to be an empty space in the surrounding field. However, in looking closer, next to the lamb, probably 20 feet away, were piles and piles of shoes, like fancy boots and high-heeled shoes. Next to those were scattered dresses and suits, and finally at the end of these slight rolling hills of luxury were the designer bags. "What the hell?" Clint said, looking at this scene. The lamb kept crying out, but suddenly an even sharper sound appeared right behind us. "Shelma," a figure said behind us. I turned, and a massive, towering figure looked down at us. He must have been 6'8", and had a long braided beard with what I guess were dreadlocks ending in beads. His hair was pulled back and also in dreadlocks ending in colored beads, with an ornate head wrap covering forehead. He wore some kind of strange toga or something. All 3 of us froze, against our better instincts. The man repeated what he said, looking at me, and then Gwen. "Shelma." Then he smiled. He said some other stuff that I couldn't understand. Then he pointed behind us. We all 3 looked. "Lehar," he said. He repeated it several times. There in the distance, behind all the stacks of luxury clothes and the frightened lamb, was a large statue of a woman. I think it was a woman. She stood there in a simple white dress like toga and held a lamb. "What the hell?" I said under my breath. When I turned around, Clint was pulling his fist back on his good arm and slammed it into this giant's jaw. A large man fell with a huge thud, slamming his head against the ground. "Clint, what the hell?" I shouted in a whisper. He then said, "Let's just grab some stuff and get out of here. I'll go free that lamb, and you 2 grab whatever you can," and he was off. I wanted us to run out of there and return to the car. I had no idea what was happening, but what I did know was I was scared out of my mind. Gwen was shrieking in hysterical fear and ran off to the pile of cloths. Instead of grabbing anything, though, she ducked down to hide. I followed close behind her. "Gwen, we need to get out of here. Something strange is going on here," I said to her. I could see tears running down her eyes. Suddenly Clint shouted, "Got it," and the lamb was free. It bolted off foolishly into the night. Gwen and I both made our way closer to the building, away from the area with the statue and the cloths. Clint just stood there with a self-satisfied grin on his face. I was about to shout out to him to run, but suddenly Gwen put her hand over my mouth. She shushed me and pointed out to the field. Suddenly, 3 more large men, similarly dressed to the first one, were sprinting towards Clint, who hadn't noticed them yet. They tackled him, catching him almost totally by surprise. He had barely enough time to turn his head before they had him knocked out on the ground. "Damn, what do we do?" Gwen asked me, digging her fingernails into my forearm. "I'll call the police. This is insane." That's when I realized I dropped my phone out in the field when Gwen and I started running. It was now located not too far from where they were dragging Clint. "Do something," Gwen shouted in as low of a whisper as she could manage. The three men, now accompanied by others, all dressed in utterly bizarre and anachronistic type clothing. The closest that I could tell was it was Greek or something. I had no idea. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear. They watched the strange people tie Clint to the stake where the lamb was. Suddenly the sound of machinery started up, and we could see some kind of forklifts or warehouse machinery pushing the piles of luxury items closer to Clint. Lehar. All the people were chanting in unison. There must have been around 20 of them there now. Some were carrying lit torches. We need to get back to the car. We have to get out of here and get help. Your phone is in the car. We can call for help, I said. Gwen could barely keep herself together, but I think my plan was better than nothing, so I led her back to the car. We found a path around the other side of the warehouse that was dark that I was fairly sure no one would see us. It will be okay, I kept saying, mostly to myself, unconvincingly. We finally got to the car that was parked slightly off-road, and that's when it happened. The shouting had reached a crescendo, and massive flames licked up towards the sky. A quick scream, this time I'm pretty sure was not a lamb, filled the night air, before harshly and suddenly stopping. It was miles before we finally had cell reception, but we just kept driving. We drove in silence all the way back to the city without calling anyone. I don't know whether it was the trauma of what we experienced, but we didn't go to the police until the next day. One was constantly crying, and I just didn't know what to say. Was it some cult or something? I mean, that was definitely the facility to a huge international corporation. What had we got ourselves into? We explained ourselves, or tried to at least, first to some bewildered-looking cops. Then we were introduced to a senior detective who identified himself as Detective Sumray, and we recounted everything. He nodded sympathetically as we told him absolutely everything. The detective said not to worry, everything would be okay. Gwen and I spent the entire Sunday at the police station, most of it just us two together in some kind of conference room waiting for the detective to return. Finally, around 8 p.m. the detective came in and said not to worry, that Clint was okay. Apparently, it was some big misunderstanding, and he was safe back home at his grandparents who lived a state over. You kids should be more careful. The company had allowed some film crew to shoot some movie out there, and you all stumbled onto that. They agreed not to press any charges. You all should be more careful in the future, the detective said, still with his odd-looking smile. No, that's not right. It was not a movie, I started to say, but he put his hand up to silence me. Look, I get it. If anything more comes of any of this, I'll get in contact. I have your information, he said with another smile. I looked down at the floor searching for something to say, and that's when I noticed them. His impeccable and expensive-looking designer shoes. We've been living with this for over a year now, and we still haven't seen or heard directly from Clint. Clint was unreliable, but he wouldn't just vanish like that. I can't get any of this out of my head. The designer shoes that the detective was wearing, the pathetic crying of the lamb, or the sight of the strange men in their ancient clothing. What the heck am I supposed to do now?